Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Bastille called Wild World. You know, I got a gut feeling that this review will end up being more controversial than it probably should be. Hell, the last time I covered Bastille it ended up kind of controversial. Mostly because, while I didn't really mind the album, I also felt a little bit distant from it. Keep in mind that this was a group that had a song that landed on my top 10 best hit songs of 2014, and a record of which I was indeed positive, but not one that I felt held up outside of a couple of songs. Part of it was the somewhat awkward blend of textures that came through in matching colder, stiffer electronic beats and percussion with more organic vocal textures, and then when you factor in lyrics that occasionally aimed for higher concepts and yet rarely stuck the landing when they weren't wallowing in bad relationship melodrama that didn't match the bombast. Look, it just felt like an odd blend that didn't really work for me. But to be fair, Bastille's always kind of been a weird mishmash of an act, probably closest to the percussion over melody brand of indie pop rock that can be very hit and miss with me, and yet they did have a distinctive style and attitude that I wished I could like more, even despite their total lack of a genre. And that's one reason I was willing to give their follow-up album Wild World something of a chance. Same production team, a little bit more experience and polish and knowledge of a workable sound, maybe it would lead to some stronger songs. Was I right? Well, nope. If anything, Wild World is the record that actually had me questioning my rationale for liking Bastille in the first place, which is never the reaction you want to get from an album. Because, look, while I might get some of their superficial appeal at this point, the more I dug into Bastille's Wild World, the more I found lingering issues in the production and songwriting pretty much across the board that really got on my nerves. And what's all the more disconcerting is that these are problems that have been lingering since their debut album, just obscured by songwriting that felt stronger or more cohesive sound. Because you sure as hell don't get the latter here. And that's the thing, on the surface many of the individual elements that factor into a Bastille album could indeed work. Dan Smith is rarely a visceral singer, but his earnest tones and multi-tracking could lead to real power if the instrumentation had enough warmth or dramatic swell in order to cushion it. There's certainly more guitar on this album, either the sparse plucked tones on Power, or the smoky stab at a torch song on Two Evils, or the blocky riffs that characterize tracks like The Currents, Lethargy, or especially Blame, which runs away as the best song of the sound for actually being able to convert these elements into a song with something of an edge. Mostly courtesy of one of the many nervy bass lines that Bastille actually manages to make work. I like a lot of the bass lines on this album. And hell, I could even get on board with the sizzle of the strings on The Currents or the horns on Send Them Off. I didn't really like any of the compression there, but it at least felt like an interesting instrumental idea. But yet, just like Bad Blood, the problem comes in when you actually start putting all these pieces together. The first asset being that nobody seems to have the slightest clue what to do with the percussion. Sometimes you get some real drums that can build some propulsive momentum, but more often than not, we've got these drum machines that are either smothered in dampening filters or effects, or of such poor fidelity that they don't match with the rest of the mix at all. Of course, the overload of effects is a problem pretty much across the board, and shows a lot of real problems coming through in the mixing of this record. Instead of letting instruments breathe normally or build to some natural swell and crescendos on their own, they're just compressed and contorted into blocks that are haphazardly stacked together, hoping that there's enough reverb and filters to blur it all together and make something cohesive. And not only does it lead to a starkly monochromatic mix lacking in some natural texture, it also falls right into the trap of overemphasizing compressed percussion over any sort of melody, which does a complete disservice to some of these hooks, which aren't bad. And given this was also symptomatic of the mixing on Bad Blood, which is handled by Mark Crew and the band itself as they are here, I think I need to explain to them why this doesn't work, or perhaps give off the wrong impression of the band. One of the Bastille's greatest strengths, as I said before, is Dan Smith. When he's not doing his falsetto, that is. And a lot of that big strength comes in his earnestness. He's not as stiff as Sam Smith can be, but he's got some organic presence here. And when you pair him with instrumentation that's not only cold, but it'll only build to a natural crescendo through bad EQing or post-production, you're not flattering his natural vocal tone. Now, granted, there's a part of me that thinks that they might grasp that concept and they just don't care, as evidenced by An Act of Kindness, where Smith tries for a binaural vocal pickup, your left ear, then right ear, then blended together in the middle, but the clash in fidelities here when it comes from the binaural side feels more sloppy than anything else. It really doesn't come together. It doesn't help that any stab at mixed depth feels completely forced, between abusing reverb or the bass on Fake It that completely swamps out the rest of the song, and then factoring in the overcompression all over the place which renders tones like the shrillness on Warmth or Snakes. It sounds like the band has just completely misunderstood their strengths, and I don't understand why. Yeah, I get it, they were inspired by the clashing tones that Kanye West has used in the past, and they were going for more of a mixtape feel with some of the vocal samples. But look, there's an art to dramatic contrast and defining edges within your sound that Bastille aren't even close to mastering. Most because I get the impression that they really kind of chickened out on really letting any of these raw tones actually clash with each other. They wouldn't have used so much reverb to blur everything over otherwise. Granted, if you're looking for a lyrical theme on this album, chickening out would probably be an apt term, as Dan Smith's lyrics might be the biggest exercise in arrested development I've heard since Green Day's Dose. And let me start by saying that, yes, I totally get that Dan Smith is well aware that his refusal to not take responsibility, that it's not a good thing. Instead trying to comment on humanity's tendency to bury one's head in the sand then rather than acknowledge the truth and move on with their life or grow up. But just because I understand the thematic arc doesn't mean that I don't find it insufferable or poorly executed. Most because, just like on Bad Blood, these sorts of half measures are a terrible fit for Dan Smith's more earnest vocal delivery, which doesn't have the subtlety or edge to really pull it off. That's where we get into the framing of these situations, like on Warmth, where instead of actually dealing with the world, he runs to the comfort of a lover and prefers to ignore all of it. And yet, the upbeat delivery makes it clear we're supposed to be on his side with that sort of willful denial. That same disconnected framing crops up again and again on this record. Lethargy and its bizarre string of David Bowie references that barely connect together, the opening song Good Grief that doesn't come close to capturing the complex emotions that come when trying to put on that happy face when you're either dumped or somebody dies, to Snakes, which turns that subtext into text in the most thuddingly obvious way possible. And here's the problem with taking this sort of thematic arc. Not only does it render some well-meaning political statements that I might actually agree with, like on the currents and four walls against misleading propaganda and the death penalty, as half-hearted at best, it makes his relationship songs even more obnoxious than usual. At its least offensive, you get Power, which sounded a lot better when it was called Fire Away by Chris Stapleton last year, and at least implied some mental instability in that situation. But then you have Send Them Off, where he calls upon the girl to exercise his jealousy out and evokes Desdemona from Othello. You know, the woman that Othello strangled in a jealous rage in that play that plays the impetus for quelling jealousy on now the innocent that Dan Smith is trying to do here, and shows that while he might reference Shakespeare, he sure as hell doesn't understand it. And it gets even worse. I could talk about Fake It and how instead of actually dealing with the roots of a relationship problems, he's just prepared to ignore all of it and lie. But the real ugly song for me is Two Evils, where he's in competition with another guy for some girl's heart, and he says, as the lesser of two evils, it pays to be the nice guy sometimes. Seriously, dude, what's your problem? Between the condescension disguised as earnestness there, or Glory where he says that there's no point in aspiring to the impossible, or an act of kindness where he's rendered shaken and even guilty by the mere act of someone doing something good to him, this record reads easily as one of the most cynical and nihilistic pieces I've heard in a while. But the problem is that it's not framed like that. At least Anoni seemed to grasp that her hopelessness was reckless and toxic, even if her delivery didn't fit with that. But not only does Dan Smith's delivery not reflect his writing, the nihilism behind it screams of immaturity and just convenience, which gets insufferable really fast. You're 30, get over yourself. In other words, the more I think about this album, the less I like it. So why isn't it getting an even lower score? Well, to give Bastille some credit, there are a couple decent melodies and grooves you can get past the production, and as I said, Blame is a legitimately solid song, if only because the lyrics actually try to have an edge, even if Dan Smith's attempt to convey it vocally is kind of hysterical. But yeah, this record soured on me really fast, and the more I think about it, the more I wondered what the hell happened here. Bastille had some presence. They were on the upswing with songs like Pompeii, but I'm right now coming off of Bad Blood, now this. They're showing a lot of potential that's just getting squandered. For me, it's a strong 4 out of 10, and the only people to whom I can recommend this are the hardcore fans. But look, folks, there is indie rock acts out this year that deliver more depth, stronger grooves, and better production than this borderline silent majority act. Check out Parquet Courts or Car Seat Headrest, or even that last Young the Giant album that was better than I expected, whereas this, I'm sorry, real disappointment. And Bastille, I hate to say this, but grow up. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I got the poll up here, so you guys can all tell me how wrong I am. Look, I was hoping to like this, folks, but this really did not come together. Between the production and the writing, it just got on my nerves really fast. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out, I will try to cover them. As I said, this upcoming weekend is going to be kind of crazy, so I'm not sure I'm going to have that much time to get that many reviews out. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.